Welcome back, everyone, and welcome, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm very excited to talk about the early plans for applying to college. So this is something that a lot of people get really confused about. I don't know if you find the same thing on the call. And they call it early application. I'm like, that's not what it is.
Or
So,
early admission, I hear a lot as well.
yes. Exactly. And then they're like, what's priority? So let's try and get really into the nuts and bolts and define all of them. So why don't you go ahead and kind of get started?
Just run them down.
Yeah.
Sure. So I guess the two I always think of first are early action and early decision. And that gets really confusing because they both have the word early in the title, and they seem interchangeable, but they're really not. The way I like to describe the difference is, early action is a way to apply early, get an early answer, but still have lots of opportunity to choose. You can apply to multiple schools early action, consider multiple offers. You're not dialed in or bound to a school. Early decision, however, as you know, is a binding contract where parent and student and school counselor sign the contract agreeing to the terms, which basically will say, if you're accepted, you will attend, hands down. You will say thanks, but no thanks to any schools that have offered you admission already. You will not submit any further applications, and you will withdraw any applications pending. So you're committed. I like to tell students that early decision is like committing at the point of application. Which essentially it is, right? And so those are the two that come to mind first. And we're going to talk about some examples of schools that are early action, early decision. Early decision schools. University of Pennsylvania has early decision, right? Tufts University, Boston College. You name it. A lot do, but a lot don't. And it could be, if they don't have early decision, they might have early action. Schools that come to mind with early action, I think of University of Michigan. That's a really popular one with an early action plan.
University of Maryland.
Yeah, University of Maryland or Fordham University. Those are just a few that just come to mind, but many schools have them. And there are a few out there that actually have early action and early decision, and you could choose which early plan you want to apply by, which is kind of cool, kind of freedom of choice for a lot of students, right?
Although I will say that's one way of looking at it. I also feel like maybe this is just kind of confusing, so it's a little bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, it's good. On the other hand, I'm like, maybe too much choice.
So. Right. That is true. And then I think where it becomes more confusing is when you have different words or different letters in front of the EA for early action, like restricted early action or REA. That sometimes seems confusing to students. And really what that is, as you know, is places like Harvard and Princeton, I think Stanford, right, has REA, where you're signing essentially an agreement with the school when you apply early there, saying, I won't apply any place else early, but you're not bound to the school. So if they accept you, if Stanford says yes, you're not committed to going there like you would be if it were early decision, but you're also not accepting any other, you're not putting yourself out there for any other early offers. And let's face it, a lot of the schools that have restrictive early action are generally schools that are kind of in the same echelon, right? The same
most
kind of
selective, highest level.
Yes, highest levels, or most rejective, or whatever.
Most rejective.
These days,
I think when they're denying 96%, we can call them most rejective. Yes,
kind of can, right?
Yeah.
And so they just want to know, the Yale wants to know that you're not also applying early to Harvard. They want to know that you're picking which one from among these is your top choice. And so again, you're not committed to the school, but you also can't have any other early applications out there, which for some students can be limiting.
It's very limiting. I will say, I think it's important to note the exceptions for public schools. Like you can apply to University of Michigan and Stanford, but can you apply to Stanford and Harvard early? No, you cannot. You absolutely cannot. And that violates not just kind of the definition, but the very spirit of it. Because I think that's exactly what they're trying to avoid, is sort of the student who's going for it with all of these highly selective colleges. I've even heard, and I mean, please double check on their website, but I think I saw on Stanford's website a few years ago, and I don't know if they're still doing this, that they did decide to allow students apply even to kind of less selective private schools that offered scholarships if there was so they're trying to be flexible, and I applaud it, but it makes things then even more confusing. So you really have to look at the fine print with each school too.
Yes. Yes, you do. It is confusing. And just like with everything, what we say here, yes, we know what we know, and the rules change all the time, and schools from year to year might change their plan, their early action plan. And I can give you an example of years and years and years ago, and I'm talking probably early 2000s, maybe mid 2000s. University of Michigan, if you recall, at the time used to not have an early action plan. They used to have kind of these cohorts, which if you applied by a certain date, like I want to say like middle of October, you were considered in that grouping of students,
Right.
But it wasn't termed as an early anything. They also had a kind of a second early grouping, but again, it wasn't termed. It was just that if you got your application in by this date, you were considered under that grouping of students, and you were either, admitted, denied, whatever. And it changed without a lot of notice in 1 year, where I had a student who was considering University of Michigan. He was saying, well, I'm applying early action. And I was arguing with him. They don't have early action, because I had not yet heard that, yes, in fact, they did. And he was saying, but that's what I heard. That's what they told me. I said, no, you're wrong. They have this. And so I'm going through this whole explanation of how they don't have early action. And then I realized, oh, wait, yes, they do. They just adopted it this year. And so you have to pay attention to all the newest data. So for current juniors, right, who are just about to be seniors, who will be applying next year, what stands this year may not stand next year. They might make a change sometime in the months to come. And by the time you're ready to apply, so always read the latest of their information on their websites, the admissions websites.
The other thing too that I have to say that I think is unfortunate is they don't always update it until August 1st on the common application or the coalition. So like, for example, I'm helping some of my students now by setting up these charts and looking at deadlines and things. And I have a little asterisk at the bottom that says, as of, June 1st, must re-verify after August 1st.
Yes.
Because at that point is really when the schools, I think, feel an obligation to have things posted. I do want to be clear that I think most schools try and have everything done before then, try and be transparent, but I've just run into schools being like suddenly there's a switch and I'm like, what happened? So
occasionally that does happen, and we've all heard stories, and we've experienced ourselves with students sometimes where even with a supplemental essay, there's been a change kind of midstream in even the wording of a topic or topic choices, and we've said, wait, but a month ago it was this, what happened? Right. And so occasionally, and I don't say that to scare anybody, but just kind of always keep checking.
Exactly. Yeah, just keep checking. Do pre-work now. I think it's worth it to save time, but know that you might need to tweak something, or something might be a little different. Verify everything after August 1st, unless it's clear that their website is fully updated and recent, in which case then I think you can kind of relax a little bit. So yeah. Sure. So what about, I think we're missing something that actually is probably what most schools do, which is priority, because they're rolling. So let's define those terms.
Sure. So priority really is just a date by which certain schools that have priority will say, get your application in by this date. And sometimes it means to be considered for certain scholarships or certain housing choices. There can just be certain little stipulations at different campuses where they want you to apply by or they have a priority date and a regular date, let's say. And if you apply by the priority date, you're in the running for maybe certain scholarships or certain preferential programs or what have you. And there might be some programs, like I want to say Purdue is a school that has a priority deadline for certain majors like computer science or nursing, right? Yeah. And so if you're looking at certain programs at certain schools, it's always smart to be aware of whether there's a priority deadline for the program you're applying to, which can happen.
Yeah, priorities. I mean, and it is confusing because priority can also be just very similar to early action. But then at other schools, there are some schools that basically are going to take students up until through August. But if you hit their priority, which honestly might be March 1st, might be November 1st, like we don't know. But then that will qualify you to more scholarships. And I was talking to a mother, and her student had, blown off the early action deadline to Virginia Commonwealth. And I said, because he was like, Mom, it's a no problem for me. It's a safety. I'm going to get in. And I said, the unfortunate thing is he is going to get in, but he might have gotten a scholarship if he'd hit that deadline. And now it's too late. Like they're not going to bend on that, because why would they?
Right. Well, and you bring up a really good point about getting things in early for places that are no problem, or safety schools. A lot of people call these your safety schools, right? It's always been in my practice to advise my students to apply, or if they have early action or if they have rolling admission, something that's non-binding or priority, get your applications in by those earlier deadlines. If it's a safety school, or even kind of a lower, more attainable target for you, because you're more likely to get a positive response from that school. And boy, the pressure it takes off of you to have those early yeses. I always see that. And you and I both worked on the high school side, and we were in the trenches watching the students on their day, their daily, ruminations over all of this. And they were in and out of our offices and stressing out about things. And so when I would have a student and I could get them to really just get everything in early, or their safety schools and target schools in early for applications, the pressure it took off, I could almost visibly see their shoulders, go from like, weighted down to again, that they were able to breathe again. And even if it was their super safe school that they kind of knew they were going to get into no matter what, it took a lot of the stress out of the process to say, hey, I have a place. Even if nothing comes out, I have this place. And they were more than likely getting more responses that were positive too. But it's a game changer in the psyche of a student and the family. It takes a lot of pressure off. So please, if there's anything I can urge everyone to do, it's apply early action or priority rolling, whatever it is, to your safest schools. So you have maybe a pocket full or a few positive responses by December, January, February, and you're not stressing through the whole season.
I have had the same experience, and I can't tell you how often I've had students come in and say, Ms. Ganga, I'm going to college. And I'm like, we always knew you were, but I'm glad that
was
now
exactly my response.
I'm glad that now you are feeling that it too,
Yes.
because especially if they get a deny or a defer early, they're devastated. They think that they're not going to get in. And I always have to talk them through, we planned for this. We were hoping different, but we planned. And so we have a plan B, we have a plan C, we're all good,
Right.
But when they get in, they believe it, when they get into one of those. So I think that's great. All right. So we only really have like a minute left, but any particular like myth that you want to bust just really quickly?
Well, before the myth, I don't think I really described rolling admission, right? And I apologize for that, 'cause I
you're
got
right.
off on a
Thank you.
tangent. I was very
Yeah.
excited about this topic. Sorry. So rolling admission, really, there is a deadline, but it's way in the, by like April, May. So the idea with rolling admission is admissions officers will read the applications and decide upon them as soon as they're complete. And so usually the turnaround is fairly quick. I mean, some schools quicker than others. Like I know, Alabama, I have students applying to University of Alabama and they get an answer in a couple of weeks, or Mississippi, even those are a couple that are fast. And that's a great way to get an early answer. And it's a good idea to get in on the early end of rolling admission before they've already made lots of offers and have fewer seats left too.
Yeah. At some of these schools, I have found that they're a little more generous early.
Yes.
Even if they say they're not, I think that they just are, because they start to realize as time goes in how selective they can be, and they might start to pull back if they're having kind of a banner year. So
Exactly.
Absolutely.
I know we're just about out of time, but a quick myth that I'd like to debunk is that a question I always get on calls is, well, what should my early school be? I need to pick an early decision school. Well, not everybody has to pick an early decision school. I don't think it's a matter of having it on a menu and saying, okay, what's my early decision choice? It's right for certain students, but it's not right for everybody. So please don't feel like everyone must have an early decision school. That is not always the case. Although we know that, yes, it can give you a leg up in a certain way to some degree. That's another discussion for another time about specifically early decision, but please don't everybody think you must have an early decision.
Mhm. And by the way, that is something that we have had done shows on in the past. So, go onto our blog post, blog.getintocollege.com, and you can look for that general sort of topic and, read what we have to say about it. So, all right, Lisa, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so everyone will be back in just a minute with Nicole Doyle, and she and I will be discussing the activity list on the applications.